Welcome back everyone for a new special video game pickups, and this is going to be a retro edition, and more specifically this is a Panasonic 3DO edition of pickups. So with that said, first up, as we see, is a very unique and somewhat bizarre fighting game. It was considered by many to be actually a clone of Mortal Kombat. Bad gimmicks and bad gameplay, but found it for a good price, so couldn't resist. And for the most part, all these 3DO games I got a hold over the last few months have all been very good price. It's not a bad console to collect for in price range nowadays. But the first is called Way of the Warrior. It's a very interesting, sadly, yeah, I could only find it loose cheap. Next up we have one jewel case, but unfortunately is missing the front cover art, but it still does have the original back at least. But this is a classic arcade space shooter early 3D era game from Namco. Because this would show up at the beginning loading screen in Tekken 5 actually, fun fact. That's what that game is. Starblade. A very unique and actually very fun early 3D space shooter. I personally really enjoyed this game back in the day, so it does have a bit of a nostalgia factor for me personally. And yeah, the price was pretty good. Next up, we go with an interesting game called Shanghai Triple Threat. Basically, it's a combination of three different, like, Chinese games. Now, this one actually did come with the original manual, which is kind of nice. At least, that way you get full instructions how it plays. Also, I actually like the cover art. It's an interesting game. It is nice, at least that it came with mostly everything, and for a good price. But as you see, those are a combination of three different classic games. It's definitely going to be an interesting one to try. Next up we have, which I got this for I believe $1, believe it or not, one of the multiple different golf games that were out on the 3DO. I believe the 3DO had like 3 or 4 different golf games, and this is the first golf game that I got a hold of. Pretty good price, like I said, dirt cheap. And I like a lot of honestly, the art and style of a lot of these discs personally. Like I've said before, the 3DO is, in my opinion, a criminally underrated console that deserves a lot more love than it gets. So in the future, sometime, on occasion here and there, I may try to do like a retro review on a specific 3DO title, since I'm surprisingly don't see a lot of people talking about 3DO, except for the rise and fall and stuff like that of the console itself, rather than talk about the actual software. About the only YouTube channel I see really it talked about any actual games was Classic Game Room and GameSack, and that's about it. So in the future sometime I'll try to give a voice. Next up we have a cool jet space exploration game that I've wanted to try for a long time. As see, of course, it is by Crystal Dynamics, which Electronic Arts and Crystal Dynamics would do a lot of the games for the 3DO. Which is no surprise, because the one who basically was behind creating the 3DO was the original founder of Electronic Arts. Keep in mind, back when the Panasonic 3DO was released, at that time, Electronic Arts was actually pretty highly respected in like the early to mid 90s when this would come out. At that time, EA was pretty well highly regarded, as was Activision at the time. But definitely this is a game I've wanted to try. Also, I'd like to find at reasonable price and try out this Horde game, which is technically a bit of like a strategy type game, like old school Warcraft and things like that, though it also has some other elements, but unfortunately the Horde is a pricey game. If I could find one for a reasonable price, I might try to pick it up eventually. But it's all about patience, and I actually love the cover art to this. I think that is beautiful. It really feels like something out of, like, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, in my opinion. Next, now this is the biggest deal to me of the pickups, and the music I chose in the background is from this game. Now, I'm sure you know that this got a digital remaster re-release on modern consoles. Technically, this also originally first came out, you could find on the Sega Genesis, as well as the Super Nintendo, but it was a very small release title back in those days. This would be, I believe, the first digital or rather CD format of the game out of this world, which is considered by many to be a great cult classic game from the time period. This is considered by many people of this time frame that this was considered the best port of the game. And that's just a card for the seller, which I got the game through. But yeah, actually the disc is actually in mint condition, everything. So I was happy I was able to find this for a good, reasonable price sum. And I look forward to eventually getting around and actually giving a full review of this game. Because this is one I've played the re-release, but I want to try the original style from the 90s. Last three. First up is regarded as a not-so-great game at the time. Of course, that being Shockwave 1. The Shockwave 2 is pretty highly regarded. Now, this game is, of course, listed as one of the top 5 best-selling games for the 3DO. No surprise. And like you see, like the actual case size of this is huge. Just to look in comparison to a normal standard jewel case size. That is the size difference between the two. It's kind of crazy. But no, I still wanted to actually play the original and try it, since I already have the second game. And I could speak, I actually think the second game is pretty solid, so I am kind of curious to eventually give this game a shot. Now you can tell from a lot of the art style and elements in this game that this has a lot of the same, I would say, probably Warhawk is probably a game that was heavily influenced by this, as it was also a kind of bizarre 3D jet fighter and with also full live action cutscenes, stop motion video. Next up, of these bigger ones, we have another somewhat less well known, but by a lot of people's opinions, one of the best looking 3D jet fighting combat games on the 3DO, and that is VR Stalker. Which, like many others, of course, now, this is what it actually looks like on the inside when you unclip. Advertisements for our games, pretty cool, like Pro Fight Stick, and this you would have up here, usually like a small little manual, like advertisement stuff, and then the actual disc game, and it's weird how they do this where you could slip these plastic things out. I would say design-wise, arguably, 3DO is probably some of the most unique case designs I've seen personally of their standard version cases. Now this is the last of the pickups, also another like space exploration type of game. That's kind of interesting, and I do definitely dig the artwork. That's one thing, some of the artwork covers and stuff honestly remind me of stuff you would have seen back on like the Atari 2600 box art. I just think it's really cool and unique and different, and I appreciate that. Like, I miss old school like box art like this stuff that you just don't see that much nowadays, unfortunately. But admittedly, my bias because I love sci-fi. But in all, that is it for this special edition of Pickups. A special retro version for the 3DO, and with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel, and hopefully you enjoyed the music in the background. See you again soon enough.